You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today we're going to remember certain things that we've forgotten. I don't mean forgotten voluntarily. It's more like we've been convinced, urged, required, forced to suffer amnesia about, forced to forget them. Like, for example, when Minneapolis hit us upside our heads, democracy itself. Like civil liberties, like intelligible, comprehensible discourse, like political figures being accessible to their constituents without that translating into assassination attempts or accomplishments. The vulgarity finding communication at large to be an inhospitable home. So many things, but temporarily, I emphasize temporarily, lost sight of, or misplaced, forgotten, some would say abandoned. Some are hoping they are abandoned. And then there's facts, too. You know, like the Gulf of Mexico being called by its rightful name, the Gulf of Mexico. Like vaccines saving lives. Like what's in the content of the Constitution of the United States of America. And like Ukraine. Today, my special guest for the conversation is Sara Cincurova, a journalist from the region itself who goes frequently into Ukraine and works there, and who has covered that country and its war against being absorbed by Russian invasion for the past 4 years. She's had stories published in the New York Times and Ms. Magazine, among other news periodical articles, and her stories show not only her brain, but her heart as well. I'll return with Sara in just a moment after this brief message. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Sara Cincurova, welcome to Women's Media Center Live. It's good to have you here.
Thank you so much.
You wrote an amazing piece about Ukraine and rape in war as a war crime, and of course now it's been declared by the United Nations Court as a crime against humanity. So talk about that piece in Ukraine, where everybody has forgotten Ukraine now, of course, because everybody's focused on the latest of Trump's miseries, and whether that's Middle East or whether it's poor Cuba or whatever it is, he's got attention focused elsewhere. But Ukraine continues to suffer, and you're very familiar with that situation. Tell us about it. I'm just going to turn this over to you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for asking this question about Ukraine, because, of course, the full-scale war has been going on for more than 4 years now, and people continue to suffer, and people continue to live under occupation, and, people, POWs and civilians are being unlawfully detained by Russian forces. So it's very important that we don't forget about them. I've been doing a lot of reporting lately, not just for the New York Times piece, but for various outlets, collecting stories of women, but also stories of men and children who have experienced rape as a weapon of war or sexual violence at the hands of the Russian troops. Based on the stories and the testimonies that I collected the situation is absolutely harrowing.
Uh,
So at this point, I have spoken maybe to about 60 or 70 men and women who have been sexually abused.
uh,
Um, with the New York Times piece featuring some of the most acute and, some of the most difficult stories. So we've heard from a woman who was raped by a Russian soldier and gave birth and is now raising a baby that
oh,
resembles the perpetrator,
mm,
and that, you know, and who wanted to have an abortion but couldn't because she was too far along. We have heard from women who were imprisoned and detained by Russian forces in various places in occupied Ukraine and in Russia,
mm,
who were constantly assaulted, beaten up, stripped, groped, and humiliated. I have observed that there is a real pattern of humiliating the women, um, and perpetrating psychological abuse.
mhm,
So, for example, many of the women that I have spoken to who have been imprisoned or unlawfully detained captive by Russian troops recounted that they had to use the toilet naked in front of the soldiers,
uh-huh,
or that they were, for example, shocked with electric shocks to their
oh, mm,
fingers or nose or ears or nipples. And the Russian soldiers who often, are very young and very often are humiliating and raping women who are in their 60s or 70s or
uh,
even 80s, are very, are mocking the women and
mm,
making fun of them. And so we've heard really horrendous stories of rape and physical pain and torture, but also psychological humiliation, which I
mm.
think plays a big role.
Yeah, of course. Oh my God, this is so awful. This is just so awful. Did when you wrote the story for Ms. magazine for me, that you talked about older women helping older women who had been rape survivors. Talk about that. And is that an underground network, or what? How does that function?
Right. So there is this NGO that is called Sema Ukraine,
Uh-huh.
and that gathers women who are survivors of wartime rape. Sema is
Uh-huh.
not the only organization in Ukraine.
Uh-huh.
There are several different survivor groups for women and also for men. So I just wanted to point that out, that this
Uh-huh.
is not the only survivor group. And yes, women from this NGO are often meeting and helping one another. They are also friends, and
Mm,
they actually one of the women from this group actually released a documentary film called Traces
mm,
that premiered in Berlinale earlier this year.
mhm.
And it's a documentary on how they are healing together, I would say. Um, and when it comes to elderly women, or vulnerable women in general, or
Yeah.
women that belong to different protected groups,
Yeah.
so elderly, but this also relates to or concerns disabled women,
Uh,
women and girls who are still children. We know that there's cases of wartime rape perpetrated against them. So for another piece that I have been covering, I actually covered a case of a disabled, bedbound,
oh.
nonverbal woman
Oh
who
my God.
was abused. And also, there is a UN report, a UN 2024 report, that mentions that there is a pattern of Russian soldiers
Mm-hmm.
in occupied territories, towns or villages, that will conduct house searches
Uh,
first, and to pick the most vulnerable women. So this is not
uh,
just something that I noted myself, but it's also something that
oh, I'm
has
sure.
been
I'm
featured in
sure.
the report.
I'm sure you didn't invent it yourself. I mean, it's too horrible to be dreamt up by one of us. God, this is just awful. Is there any? I mean, has Ukraine and Zelensky, who's the person we hear about most in the West, have you kind of given up on it? I mean, given up on the United States, given up on any possibility of help in this sense?
Well, that's a very complicated question, and I'm not necessarily covering politics right now, but
Uh,
I can speak.
for the
How
people, the feeling in the people.
exactly. I can maybe share more about what I'm hearing from civilians in Ukraine,
Hmm.
which is that yes, I think some of them have given up. What I hear very often as a journalist from Slovakia, and Slovakia being Ukraine's neighboring country, is that people in Ukraine often ask me, how is it possible that
Yeah,
people of Slovakia or people in other European countries are not afraid that the war is going to spread?
yeah,
This is something that I hear very often. That Ukrainian people will say, "We understand that the war is in Ukraine, and we understand that some people or some governments are not really interested in sending help or sending weapons. But what we don't understand is that you're in our neighboring country, and if something happens, then the war might spread. And how
yeah,
how come you're not afraid yourselves, right?"
yeah,
And it
yeah.
is true that in the light of these war crimes that I have been documenting and talking about, I mean, it's simply something that's almost unimaginable in Europe in
I
2026, right?
know, I know.
So,
It's like a flashback to a terrible, horrible time in World War II. It's just ghastly, and it's continuing, and it's being ignored now. I mean, it just doesn't exist. It's a sort of, well, Ukraine, we did that. Turn the page. Um,
exactly.
and it's heartbreaking. What about you and your safety? What about how does that function?
That's a tricky question because I am and I have always been a freelancer.
Uh,
So, sometimes I work on assignment with media outlets that can provide their own safety measures.
mm-hmm,
But sadly, very often as a freelancer, it is very hard. There are situations, there are pieces that I write or that I record, and for which I'm like a contractor. So, the news outlets that hire me don't take any responsibility for my safety.
oh,
And I have to say this is something that's very hard these days for freelancers in war zones in general, is that it's very hard to also place stories and find a home for your stories
of course,
because media outlets have their own correspondents and they just don't want to take
no,
responsibility for a freelancer.
right.
However, I haven't lost hope. I still go to Ukraine. I try to cover stories that are not necessarily frontline stories.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to document stories, and I'm hoping that I will be able to do something with this body of work, even though it sometimes happens that I have a good story and I can't find for it straight away.
Yeah. Oh God. And your specialty is covering rape and war.
Right, rape in war and women's rights in general.
My God. Yeah, and in general,
Yeah,
when rape in war and conflict zones in general, it was declared a crime against humanity by the Arusha Court, the International Court excuse me, out of the UN, by Navanethan Pillay and by Jessica Newworth, who co-wrote the ruling with her. She was judge president at the time. And when she declared the ruling, I wrote to her and I said, well, if this is wonderful, wonderful that it's been declared a crime against humanity, but if rape in war is a crime against humanity, then what is it in peacetime? And we
mm,
all had enjoyed a sick, sad, tragic, laughter, bitter laughter over that. Um, but at least it has been formally declared a crime against humanity. Nobody's doing anything about it yet, but eventually, perhaps it will. Perhaps it will.
right, right. If you don't mind, I would like to add that this is very sensitive. What I'm going to say is very sensitive, but I've been
Oh,
working in Ukraine for a long time now, and I have spoken to NGOs that are documenting, war crimes and testimonies and cases of
Mm-hmm.
rape. Sure, I have spoken to many survivors myself, and I have read many reports and articles.
Of
And
course.
very sadly, what I hear from women, and also sometimes from men, is that they recount to me that while they were detained and raped, they would hear phrases, for example, Russian soldiers telling them, "We have to rape you, you Ukrainian women, because we want to turn you into Russian women."
Uh-huh.
Or when the Russian soldiers torture people with electric shocks to their genitals, which
Uh-huh.
they do uh, almost systematically,
Uh-huh.
in different places, different
Yeah.
towns in occupied Ukraine and Russia. They kind of do the same
Yeah.
quote unquote procedure. They sometimes then the people who were released and that I interview will say, they told us that they want to destroy our genital organs so that we
Uh-huh.
cannot reproduce. Um,
Form of genocide too.
yeah, and this is something that I have been hearing. Of course, I'm just an individual journalist,
Yeah, of course.
going around the
Yeah.
country and gathering testimonies. But this type of discourse is something that comes up almost every time,
Uh-huh.
and it's terrifying to hear about it, and I think it's important to share this with
Of course.
listeners.
Of course it is. Of course it is. The in the Bosnian Croatian agony years ago, this was part of that um, balance sheet as well. There was a deliberate effort in that case um, by the conquering horde to impregnate women because that would turn them. Ready for this? It would turn them around, and then they would produce more of the conquerors. You understand? I mean, this is such insane thinking, and I can't wrap my mind around the 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 emotions of a woman who has, say, a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old child, and the child is a child of rape. They had rape camps in Bosnia Herzegovina,
Yeah.
and it was the same mentality. So I don't I don't know what happens between that mother and child. I can't even imagine the ironies, the agonies, the griefs that go on. And these are little children. It's not their fault. And these are women, and it's not their fault, but it's the fault of the conqueror men. And it sounds like a very similar thing has happened in Ukraine, if not worse.
Right. This is exactly why I've been mentioning it. Of course, I myself, I'm not, I'm not an organization or, an international
Right.
body, so I cannot, draw a conclusion myself. But it
And
is, it is something that I kind of hear on and on again, that there was some form of, discourse or, very harsh verbal humiliation
yeah,
when the women and men were raped and sexually abused, and a lot of it, referred to either stopping, saying things like, "We want you Ukrainians to stop from reproducing, so we're going to destroy your
right,
sexual organs,"
right.
or saying, "We want to turn you into a Russian wife," for
Yeah,
example.
yeah. Oh, lucky you, God. Ah, oh, this is so awful. This is just so awful. And what is your, and I know this is just your personal private take, but do you have a grasp on how long this is going to continue? I mean, will there be a Ukraine? Uh, and how can this? I mean, the world is astonished. The world is still paying attention, which isn't much, but the world is still astonished at the capacity of the Ukrainians to fight back and to continue fighting, and that's a very brave and beautiful thing. But how long can that continue? I mean, we're trying to get rid of Trump by every fast way that we possibly can, and it's not easy because he's already entrenched himself with considerable alacrity. But how can they continue to survive, and is there any hope?
Right. This is something I think about
Right, of course,
almost every
and I
every
and
day.
I
Right.
and I'm not asking your opinion as a journalist, because I know you can't give it, but I'm just saying as a person, as an observer,
Right. I as a person, I'm really worried. And the reason why I'm doing this work and why I'm talking to people who experienced or who experienced rape as a weapon of war,
mm-hmm.
or who were tortured, or who were victims of other war crimes.
Oh,
The reason why I'm doing it, and the reason why I still go there, even though sometimes I'm really on my own, and I'm just writing things on spec, or, I
mm,
go there and risk my life. But the reason why I'm doing it is because I really, you know, I would want global readers to understand the nature of this conflict,
mm,
which is that, there's so many war crimes perpetrated against women and vulnerable civilians.
well,
There's, so many people being detained and captive by Russia. There's millions of people living in occupied territories. And and what Russia is doing is really, it's terrifying, right? It's
yes,
almost impossible to imagine. It's, as we said, like war crime, rape as crime against humanity,
yeah,
with all these details that we
yeah,
just spoke about. And I think it's very important, even though, sometimes editors might be a bit reluctant to use that kind of language, or to
well,
use
it's in the UN now.
is in the UN, but I think we still have a little bit of like a fear,
oh, of
surrounding
course,
like
sure,
publishing a story, say,
right,
about children being raped, right?
right,
Disabled people being raped. Like there is
too
there is
controversial. Oh,
Yes, exactly. And there is still this this need to kind of avoid being graphic,
yeah,
or
making it palatable in some way so that
but
people turn the page. That's no help. Yeah, yeah,
but
I
yeah,
know.
I argue that understanding what's happening to women and to civilians and to vulnerable people, especially in the context in which Russia is abducting children and things like that,
Yeah,
it's crucial to understand the nature of this conflict, right? Because
yeah,
many people now think it's kind of, it's been going on for a long time. They don't, we don't
right,
necessarily hear these stories every day like we used to back in 2022. But like, if we ignore this, I mean, how many more people are going to die? How many of these stories are never going to, be recorded, or,
exactly.
be published in the
Yeah,
media? And how many people are going to flee the country and will never want to speak about it again,
that's
right?
right. Yeah,
And how many people will die before something happens? These are questions that are haunting me, and this is why I do the work, because I think it's a really necessary, like, this component is necessary to understand what's really happening in Ukraine.
mm, mm. Well, I'm very glad that we published a piece in Ms., and I'm glad we're doing this program. It's so heartbreaking because it's so utterly unnecessary, and because it is it's against what you'd think of as all human. Um, I don't even know what to call it. Connection. I mean, there is there's no sense to it. It is utterly senseless behavior, except of course to tyrants and people who have a bloodlust and a lust for war and a lot. But it is so deeply destructive, and it is so classic because it is women and children. I mean, it really is women and children. And oh God, it's just awful. It's awful. You're doing amazing work, I must say. I mean, I don't know how you're surviving, but you're doing amazing work. And you've been in Canada for a brief period, working with research at with the Toronto Metropolitan University, or
That's correct. So I'm currently a journalism fellow with the Global Migration Institute, that is part of the Toronto Metropolitan University, the TMU.
Mhm.
I've been here for 1 month, and I've been doing some research about vulnerable victims of conflicts and displacement,
Mm-hmm.
and also researching the most ethical ways of interviewing these people or these survivors.
Oh, wonderful.
Because I think it's very important to have the right approach, not to cause more harm,
Right.
especially because, of course, as journalists, we sometimes, in Ukraine, we sometimes work in conditions that are
Right.
nowhere near ideal, right? Sometimes you have to
Just
interview someone and you hear explosions
oh,
and you don't know what's going to happen, or you only have a very short time and
yeah,
to ask all these questions, right?
of course.
And I thought it would be interesting to do, to collaborate with researchers, because researchers also do collect such testimonies, but they typically have a lot more time and
Yes, sure.
and I have to think about methodology and get all kinds of
And they're not
feedback.
dodging bullets, and the enemy doesn't assume that they're part of their enemy. So, it's a very different situation.
Very different situation, but it's been interesting, reflecting on this topic and trying to see, what what's the best way to collect these testimonies that are really important.
Well, and they
That we
take the great sensitivity as well because
right,
women and children don't easily spill their beans. I mean, they don't easily say, "Oh, yes, well, I was raped and such," and they did. It doesn't happen that way. It takes time and very gentle handling and very considerate communication. And
right.
I just am amazed. What were you doing before this happened? Before?
Before the full scale war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Well, I've been a journalist for about 10 years now. I've always been a freelance journalist, so I covered other human rights stories around the
I
world.
see.
I covered migration in the Mediterranean. I was
Uh,
in the rescue ships. I actually did quite a lot of reporting on rape and violence against women in Libyan detention centers
ah,
and on Europe external borders. I've worked in Venezuela for quite some time. I had also covered a few stories of how Venezuelan women dissidents were
yeah.
sexually assaulted and tortured. And I also covered a wide array of stories in Central and Eastern Europe.
Mm,
I've also worked in countries like Belarus,
mm.
or I interviewed women who were Chechen
Oh
refugees.
boy,
They,
you really picked the places, didn't you? My God, you
I
you,
did.
you are a brave, crazy woman. Uh,
That's that sounds right.
yeah, no, 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 it's fantastic the work that you're doing, and I applaud it. And we're going to try to get you connected with anybody and everybody here who in the States who might be of help to you in your work because
Thank
it's
you so
very,
much.
very valuable work. And you conduct it with grace and bravery. I'm very grateful to you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live and for telling us the background real story of what's happening to women and children still and continuing and increasing, if anything, in Ukraine, which the world has moved on from and has forgotten. But the people in Ukraine, particularly the women and the children, haven't forgotten and haven't moved on. So thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Robin.
We have to pause here briefly, but I'll return in just a moment. So stay tuned. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Now is tomorrow, and tomorrow is right now. Those are fighting words. By most metrics, 2025 has been the worst year for the American scientific enterprise in modern history. Since January, the Trump administration has made deep cuts to the nation's science funding, including more than $1 billion in grants to the National Science Foundation, which sponsors much of the basic research at universities and at federal laboratories, and a $4.5 billion to the National Institutes of Health. Make America healthy again, ha ha. Thousands of jobs for scientists and members of science organizations have been terminated or frozen outright at these and other federal agencies, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the National Park Service. To thousands of researchers, veteran scientists and new graduate students at state universities and at Ivy League institutions, both, these sweeping reductions translate as direct personal disastrous losses. Each one may mean a layoff, a shuttered lab, a years-long experiment or field study abruptly just shut down. Graduate students turned away, lost knowledge, lost progress, lost investment, lost stability, and dreams deferred or foreclosed. Next year, well, it looks to be even worse. The 2026 budget proposed by the White House would slash the National Science Foundation by 56.9%, well more than half. The NIH, National Institutes for Health, by 39.3%, and NASA, Space, by 24.3%, including 47.3% of the agency's science research budget. It would entirely eliminate the U.S. Geological Survey's $299 million budget for ecosystems research, all U.S. Forest Service research, $300 million. And at NOAA's Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, all funding, $625 million, for research on climate, habit conservation, and air chemistry, and for studying ocean, coastal, and Great Lakes environments. This is a total blueprint for disaster. The Trump administration has also proposed shutting down NASA and NOAA satellites that researchers and governments around the world rely on for forecasting weather and natural disasters. Now, what all this means is that the very facts on which our lives depend, are not only under attack, but under flat-out erasure. Because these cuts and shavings and sweeps and sweepings and huge vacuumings up of our reality are not only for now, but they'll go on affecting the future. Imagine, for example, imagine history if had seafarers decided not to explore the oceans. Well, no new world, no new continents. I won't even start to rant about medical discoveries. The point being simply that if we don't know it now, we might very well not know it later. Not everything comes to full fruition in time. Some things are royally snuffed out and never even see the light of day. But then Da Vinci comes along and virtually invents the airplane. We can't assume that later generations will pick up where we leave off. The great Roman roads and aqueducts were trampled on in the Dark Ages. We can only assume that we ourselves forward movement as much as we can toward discovery, toward exploration, toward daring. And the thirst is certainly there. It's there among the public. Just think of the planetary excitement all over this little globe, over the recent trip of the astronauts and their moonwalk. Think of the fires of curiosity kindled in the minds of children. Think of the hope and the resolve as those minds mature. And resolve on their behalf, if not your own, if there be a future in which we can blow on those embers and flicker them into a conflagration of warmth and knowledge. We can. We must. Will we?
And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on social media at The Robin Morgan. You can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net, and you can find my new novel, Parallax, and my just-out new book of poems, Harvesting Darkness, wherever books are sold. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer, as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer for this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us next time on Women's Media Center Live.